Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Tony Stark stood at the window of Stark Tower, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his sleek black slack. His gaze swept across the New York skyline, but his mind was elsewhere. This wasn't just any day today. He was about to work with a man many believed didn't need anyone's help. But Tony Stark, in his infinite confidence and curiosity, believed otherwise. The soft hum of the elevator behind him drew Tony's attention back to the moment. A familiar sound, one he had come to expect with certain guests. He turned, a smirk playing on his lip. Tony came the deep, steady voice of Clark Kent as he stepped into the room. The man towered over most people, but he moved with a calmness that belied the godlike power within. Even dressed in civilian clothes, Clark exuded a presence that felt larger than life. Superman, as I live and breathe, Tony greeted, his tone half mocking, half genuine. Or should I just call you Clark while you renod in the blue tight? Clark gave a small, knowing smile as he approached Tony, his hand outstretched. Clark sang, "Fine, I am curious to see what you've been working on." Tony shook his hand, then spun around with the flair of a showman. "Well then, let's skip the small talk and get to the good stuff." He led Clark to a large circular platform in the center of the lab. As Tony activated his wrist device, the floor split open, revealing the item he'd been dying to show off. Slowly, a new suit of armor rose from the floor, a thing of beauty designed to be as elegant as it was powerful. Clark took a step forward, inspecting the gleaming metal plates, their curves following the exact proportions of his body. It was different from anything Tony had ever built for himself. The design reflected Superman, Cessnid sleek, lightweight but reinforced with layers of nanomaterial strong enough to withstand the vacuum of space or a plunge into the sun. This, Tony began, is the Mark someone specifically tailored for your unique physiology. It amplifies your abilities, strength, speed, flight, everything. And the best part, it to slow you down. You can move as if you were wearing nothing at all. Clark's brows lifted, clearly impressed by the engineering, but there was a hesitation in his voice. "It's impressive, Tony, but what?" Tony blinked, then shrugged. "Why not? You've saved the planet enough time. I figured it was time for someone to lend a hand. You see, that solved the problem with being the invincible man. People start thinking you don't need help, but I know better." Clark took a deep breath, eyes still on the suit. "You think I need help?" Tony turned to face him fully, crossing his arms over his chest. "I think even the strongest man in the world could use a little upgrade every now and then. Besides, this isn't just about you. It's about what? Coming." Clark's gaze shifted. "What side coming?" Tony swiped at the air, pulling up holographic projections of strange energy signals from deep space. "I have been tracking these for weeks. They were not from any source we know. No alien tech, no celestial phenomena, nothing. These readings are off the chart. And I've just got a feeling, whatever it is, it's coming straight for us." Clark's jaw tightened. He nodded. "All right, I'll try the suit." Tony smiled. "I thought you'd see things my way." The suit fit Clark perfectly, almost as if it had been an extension of him. As the final piece of the chest plate clicked into place, he felt the sudden surge of power. His senses heightened, every muscle in his body responding as if they had been unlocked to their full potential. It was exhilarating. Tony watched from his control station, a satisfied grin on his face as his screens lit up with data feeds from the suit. How does that feel? Clark lifted a hand, flexing his fingers, then in an instant shot up into the air, faster than he'd ever moved before. In the blink of an eye, he was at the upper reaches of the atmosphere. The stars shone brighter, and the earth beneath him looked more distant than ever. He turned sharply, testing the limits of the suit, pushing it through spins, dives, and sharp stops. The power felt limitless. Returning to the lab within seconds, Clark touched down as lightly as a feather. He nodded to Tony. "It's incredible. I didn't think it was possible to feel stronger." Tony waved him off with a cocky grin. "You're welcome, but don't get too excited. We were still running on a temporary power source." Clark frowned. "What's the core?" Tony hesitated for the first time about that. It's kryptonite." Clark's expression darkened immediately, his hand instinctively going to his chest where the power core was embedded in the suit. "Before you start freaking out, let me explain it. It's not pure kryptonite. It's a modified isotope Far less dangerous, but it's the only thing that can generate the kind of energy your body needs to push the limit. The moment I found out it could work as a power source, I made sure it was at minimal exposure level. Clark's pulse quickened. He could feel a faint pressure in his chest. No, something he hadn't noticed before. Amid the initial rush, minimal exposure doesn't mean safe. Tony stepped closer, his expression, serious look. I know it's not perfect, but until we find something better, this is what we've got. The readings are fine. You're fine, but if anything feels off, you tell me and we stop. Clark nodded, but the concern was clear in his eyes. All right, let's keep testing. The tests continued over the next several days. At first, everything seemed fine. Clark adjusted to the suit, performing at levels even he didn't think were possible. He moved faster than light, lifted objects beyond even his wildest limits, and flew deep into the far reaches of space without breaking a sweat. But then the headaches started. They were small at first, a dull throb at the base of his skull after long sessions in the suit. Then they grew worse, spreading through his body. He ignored them at first, pushing through knowing that Tony was counting on him. One day while testing the suit, limits in orbit, Clark suddenly faltered. His vision blurred and pain shot through his chest. It was as if his heart was constricting and his strength was draining from him. Stumbling back to Earth, Clark crash-landed into a remote field outside the city, panting heavily. He tried to stand but collapsed to his knees, clutching at the core in his chest. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Before he could react, the familiar whir of Iron Man suit filled the air as Tony rocketed down beside him. He immediately scanned Clark, his HUD lighting up with warning signals. Jesus, Clark, why didn't you tell me? Tony's voice was frantic as he quickly removed the chest plate, exposing the kryptonite core that was now glowing faintly, pulsing with green light. Clark groaned, the pain almost unbearable. I thought I could handle it, Clark gasped. His breathing labored. Tony yanked the core out, tossing it aside, and began running scan. You rejecting the core. Your body said immune response is off the chart. Clark struggled to sit up, wiping the sweat from his brow. I guess I am not invincible after all. Tony knelt beside him, his eyes darting between the scans and Clark. We need to find a new power source. Fast. Back in Stark's lab, the mood was tense. Tony paced back and forth, his mind racing through possibility. Clark sat nearby, still recovering from the kryptonite exposure. His strength had returned, but the experience had rattled him. Look, I don't like it either, Tony said, breaking the silence. But kryptonite is the only thing we've got that can power the suit at the level you need. Clark shook his head. I can wear that suit again, Tony. Not with kryptonite. Tony stopped rubbing the back of his neck in frustration. Then we need something else. Something that can generate the same amount of energy, but without killing you. Clark frowned. There has to be something. Tony's fingers tapped at the air, pulling up research on his holographic display. I've been thinking there's this element Syrian. It's so rare, dangerous, but it could work. Problem is, it's located in the Rift of Oblivion. Clark's eyebrows lifted. I've heard of it. It's unstable space, cosmic storms, black hole side. No one goes there. Tony gave a grin. Guess we'll be the first, because if we don't, we're running out of options. Clark stood up from the chair, fully recovered, but with a seriousness in his eyes Tony hadn't seen before. Stark's lab was still buzzing with the aftermath of the test, the humming of the machines providing a strange, almost soothing background to the rising tension between them. Tony hadn't even paused to sit. His mind was racing through possibilities like a supercomputer in overdrive. We have to go, Clark said simply. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. They both knew what was at stake. The Rift of Oblivion wasn't just some distant place. It was a death trap. The cosmic storms alone could tear apart most ships, and whatever lived beyond the known universe wasn't exactly on friendly terms with Earth. Tony nodded, already moving toward the workstation. I've got something prepped, but this isn't going to be a walk in the park. We were talking about a place where physics doesn't always follow the same rule. Syrian might be the key, but we don't even know if it's still there. Clark crossed his arms, watching as Tony's thin hands flew over the holographic interface. We don't have a choice. I can fight whatever's coming without the suit, and I can't use the suit unless we get that element. Tony didn't argue. His gut told him they were running out of time. The strange energy readings from deep space had been intensifying. If this alien threat was what he thought it was, they needed Superman at his full strength. He tapped the final command on his console, and a sleek, heavily armored spacecraft materialized in a nearby hangar, its engines already beginning to hum. "Suit up," Tony said, glancing over his shoulder. "We leave in 10. Clark nodded once and disappeared in a blur of motion, returning moments later in his iconic red and blue suit, though his face betrayed his discomfort. He didn't draw like feeling vulnerable, and without his full strength, he felt that vulnerability acutely. Tony S. Iron Man suit snapped around him, piece by piece, until he stood ready. "Let's get this over with," he muttered mostly to himself. The trip to the Rift of Oblivion didn't take long, not with the warp drive Tony had engineered specifically for these kinds of excursions. The journey through space was uneventful, but as they approached the rift, the ship's sensors began flashing red warning. "Cosmic radiation levels are off the charts," Tony said, staring at the readings. "We're about to hit some serious turbulence." Clark stood near the viewport, his eyes scanning the endless void of space in front of them. The rift was unlike anything he'd seen before, a swirling mass of dark matter and chaotic energy, like a storm in the heart of the universe. Space itself seemed to bend and twist around it, distorting light and matter in ways that didn't make sense. "I'll fly ahead," Clark said. "If anything happens, I can move faster than the ship." Tony shook his head. "No way. You're not at full strength, and we don't know what's hiding out there. We stick together." For once, Clark didn't argue. They both knew that the odds were against them. The rift wasn't just dangerous. It was lethal. Tony eased the ship forward, the shields flaring as they entered the outer edges of the cosmic storm. The hull vibrated, the controls fighting against the forces outside. Tony's hands were steady, though guiding them through as if he'd done this 100 times before. Suddenly, the alarms blared again. "Incoming," Tony shouted. The ship jolted violently, spinning out of control for a moment, before Tony corrected their course. Through the viewport, Clark saw them, sleek, metallic ships with designs that looked almost organic, like they had grown from some alien tree, the Voltria. "You're here," Clark muttered, his fists clenching. The Voltrian ships swarmed around them, firing beams of energy that slammed into the ship's shield. Tony gritted his teeth as he piloted the craft through evasive maneuvers. So much for a quiet trip. Clark moved toward the airlock, determination on his face. "Get me close. I'll take care of that." Tony didn't argue. The ship swooped low, diving between enemy vessels. As they passed close enough, Clark launched himself into space, a red and blue blur streaking toward the nearest Voltrian ship. His fists slammed into the side of the alien craft, tearing through its hull like paper. The ship exploded in a shower of sparks and debris, but more were coming. Tony launched into action as well, his Iron Man suit rocketing out of the ship and into the fray. His repulsor blasts tore through the enemy ships, but the Voltrian were relentless. For every ship they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. "We can keep this up forever," Tony grunted over the comm. Clark's breath was heavy, the strain of the battle clear in his voice. "Just a little longer. We need to get inside the rift." Tony's ship darted forward past the alien fleet and toward the swirling vortex of the rift. The cosmic storms intensified, the ship's size shields flickering as they fought to hold. Clark flew beside the ship, dodging blasts of energy from the Voltrian ships still in pursuit. The closer they got to the rift, the more chaotic everything became. The laws of physics seemed to break down around them. Gravity pulled in strange directions. Time seemed to stretch and compress. But through it all, they pushed forward, determined to reach the Zirian. Suddenly, the ship's sensors lit up there. Tony shouted, pointing to a small glowing object deep within the heart of the rift. Zirian, it shimmered like a star, its energy pulsing with a power unlike anything they'd ever seen. Clark's eyes locked onto it, and without hesitation, he dived into the heart of the rift. The cosmic storms roared around him, the energy tearing at his skin, but he pushed through. His hand reached out, grasping the Zirian. The moment his fingers touched it, a surge of energy shot through him. It was unlike anything he had ever felt, pure, raw power. But it wasn't outrageous power. It was stability, balance. He flew back to the ship, holding the Zirian tightly in his hand. Tony was already at the airlock, opening the hatch to let him inside. Clark stepped in, the glow of the Zirian casting strange shadows on the walls of the ship. Tony wasted no time. He took the Zirian and immediately began working, integrating it into the suit's power core. His hands moved quickly, faster than they ever had before. There was no room for error. Let's hope this works, Tony muttered as he snapped the final piece into place. Clark stepped forward and the armor began to mold around him once more. This time there was no pain, no rejection. The suit hummed with power, but it was different now, smoother, more in tune with Clark's own energy. He flexed his fingers, feeling the strength flow through him. He was ready. The Voltron fleet regrouped outside the rift, their ships forming an impenetrable wall. But Clark was undeterred with Tony by his side. They flew out to meet the enemy. The battle that followed was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. Clark moved with a precision and power that even he had known was possible. The Zero-empowered suit enhanced his abilities in ways he couldn't have imagined. He was faster, stronger, more durable. He tore through the Voltron fleet, smashing ships aside, like they were made of glass. Tony fought alongside him, his Iron Man suit upgraded with new weapons designed specifically to take down the Voltron's advanced technology. Together, they were unstoppable. In the final moments of the battle, Clark faced off against Kragath, the leader of the Voltron. The alien warlord towered over him, his armor crackling with energy. But Clark wasn't afraid. He knew with the Zerian coursing through him that he could win. Their fight was brutal, each blow shaking the very fabric of space around them. But in the end, Clark stood victorious, Kragath's broken form floating in the wreckage of the battle. With the Voltron defeated, Tony and Clark returned to Earth. The threat was over for now, but they both knew that the universe was full of dangers, and they would face them together stronger than ever before. As they stood on the rooftop of Stark Tower, watching the sun set over the city, Tony glanced at Clark with a smirk. Next time, let's try not to rely on alien death traps, all right? Clark chuckled, shaking his head.